He told her to get an abortion. She agreed. He arrived at the clinic full of regret, but she was already leaving. 8 months later, he saw her and discovered the devastating truth, liked the video and subscribed to the channel. Love, for Sophia, had the smell of fresh brewed coffee and the soft sound of cinnamon being sprinkled over the foam. It was a morning ritual, a silent declaration she placed in Michael's favorite mug, the blue ceramic one he'd gotten from his grandmother. She loved him in the details, in the small everyday liturgies that, for her, formed the foundation of a life together. They married young, under the sun of a spring that promised to bloom forever. The whole city buzzed about the perfect couple. Her, with her dark cherry eyes and a smile that seemed to carry all the sweetness in the world. Him, with the serious posture of someone born with responsibilities on his shoulders, but who, by her side, seemed to find a rare glimpse of lightness. At least that's what others saw. Sophia, however, lived the reality behind the facade. She loved him with the purity of someone who had never learned to love any other way, a love that didn't demand grand gestures, but fed on the hope of being reciprocated in equal measure one day. She left colorful notes in the pocket of his jacket, small anchors of affection amid the ocean of formalities that was his life. Thought of you today, or don't forget to eat a proper lunch. They were simple messages, almost childlike, but loaded with a sincerity that Michael seemed incapable of deciphering, or perhaps of accepting. He, on the other hand, inhabited that marriage like an elegant ghost. He fulfilled his role with mechanical precision, came home, gave a protocol kiss on her forehead, sat at the table for the dinner she prepared with care, and answered her questions with monosyllables. Michael wasn't a cruel man, not in the classic sense. He didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't belittle her with harsh words. His cruelty was far more subtle and, for that reason, more devastating. It was the cruelty of absence, the emotional vacuum he left in every room of the house. He was there in body, but his soul seemed stuck somewhere in the past, chained to a set of rules he never questioned. The main one came in the grave, judgmental voice of his father, a man whose bitterness was as old as the calluses on his work-worn hands. A real man stays out of duty, not love, he used to say, between a swig of beer and a disdainful look at the world. Love is for soap operas, for weak people. What sustains a family is duty. That phrase, repeated endlessly during his upbringing, became Michael's dark gospel. He married Sophia not because his heart chose her, but because she was the logical choice, a girl from a traditional family, educated, beautiful, and above all, harmless. She was the missing piece on the chessboard of a life his father had designed for him. As the years passed, the silence, once a space between conversations, became an entity. It was dense, palpable, and occupied the empty chair at the table, lay between them in the bed with always clean and scented sheets. The apartment, a wedding gift from his parents, was impeccably decorated with designer furniture and a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. But inside, it was a mausoleum of unlived feelings. Sophia tried with the persistence of a gardener tending a plant in arid soil. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, and the answer was always a normal that ended any possibility of dialogue. "I thought we could travel for the holiday, maybe to the mountains," she suggested, and he replied with a "I have too much work" that sounded like a sentence. She felt the love she nurtured for him transform little by little into a chronic pain, a constant stab in her chest that she learned to ignore to keep breathing. She wondered where the guy she met in college was, the one who, for a brief moment, seemed to have stars in his eyes. Where was the man whose hands she held during a storm, feeling him tremble not from fear, but from an emotion he himself couldn't name? He had gotten lost, or perhaps she had invented him. Loneliness together was a slow poison. Sophia started talking less, smiling less often. Her notes became rarer, and the coffee with cinnamon, once an act of love, turned into just a mechanical habit. She caught herself looking at her own reflection in the window glass at night and not recognizing herself. Who was that woman who accepted so little, who settled for crumbs of attention that never came spontaneously? She began creating parallel worlds in her head, romances she read avidly, movies where the protagonists looked at each other with the intensity she so desired. It was a form of escape, a way to keep her heart warm amid the emotional winter that had settled in her home. Michael, immersed in his own universe of spreadsheets, deadlines, and pressures, seemed not to notice the change. For him, the absence of conflict was synonymous with peace. He didn't understand that the opposite of love isn't hate, but indifference, and it was in that indifference that their marriage was slowly drowning. He saw his wife moving through the house, taking care of everything with silent efficiency, and believed that was happiness. Or if it wasn't, it was the closest a man like him, forged in the anvil of duty, could aspire to. He didn't realize that her silence was no longer one of peace, but of resignation. It was the silence of someone who had screamed inside until they lost their voice. One night, a heavy rain poured down on the city, and an old leak in the bedroom ceiling reappeared. The sound of drops falling rhythmically into a bucket that Sophia positioned on the floor was the only noise in the house. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, watching the water drip. Michael was beside her, lying down, reading a report on his tablet, oblivious to everything. "We need to call someone to fix this tomorrow," she said, more to herself than to him. He didn't respond. He just turned the virtual page with a finger tap. In that moment, something inside Sophia broke definitively. It wasn't a loud snap, but a muffled creak, like a wooden beam finally giving way to the weight it had borne for too long. She looked at him, at the profile illuminated by the cold light of the screen, and saw him as he really was. A stranger. A man with whom she shared the roof, the bed, and the last name, but not life. That wasn't her companion, her accomplice, her love. He was just his father's son, a man fulfilling an obligation, and for the first time she didn't feel sadness or anger. She felt a deep emptiness, a painful clarity that she was completely, irreparably alone. The sound of the drip continued, methodical, relentless, like a clock marking the time she had lost waiting for a love that would never come. And while the rain washed the city outside, Sophia felt as if an internal storm was finally beginning to dissipate, leaving behind the desolate but liberating certainty of the end. From that night of the leak, the air in the apartment became thin, almost unbreathable. The change in Sophia wasn't external, but a seismic transformation in her inner landscape. She stopped waiting, stopped trying to fill the voids with conversations that died before being born. Her movements acquired a new economy, a precision devoid of affection. She still cooked, but now prepared the food like someone completing a task, not offering a gift. The dinners, once merely silent, became icy. The clink of cutlery against the porcelain plates was the only sound daring to challenge the oppressive silence, and each noise seemed amplified, as if echoing the exposed fracture of their relationship. Michael, immersed in his own fog of obligations, noticed the difference but interpreted it his way. He saw Sophia's new distance not as a symptom of the end, but as a kind of maturity, a resigned acceptance of the marriage model he had always considered the only possible one. He mistook her giving up for contentment, her exhaustion for peace. Little did he know he was dining every night with a woman who had already left inside, a woman who was just waiting for the right moment to take her body along. The moment arrived on a dull Tuesday, a day that had nothing special and, for that very reason, became the perfect backdrop for the collapse. The sky outside was a monotonous grey, and the city seemed to sigh with boredom. Sophia had prepared a lemon risotto, a dish that, in other times, she would make to celebrate something. Now it was just food. They ate in their respective worlds, separated by the solid wood table that seemed as vast as a desert. Michael pushed his fork across the plate, making a scraping noise. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on an undefined point on the wall, as if reading there the sentence he was about to pronounce. Then, with the same casualness as commenting on the weather, he dropped the words that had hung invisibly between them for years. "I want a divorce." The phrase fell into the quiet of the dining room with the weight of an anvil. And, as if the first stone wasn't enough to demolish what remained, he added, his voice devoid of any inflection, "I never loved you, Sophia." Sophia's world didn't stop. There was no dull thud, no sensation of free fall that books described. Instead, she felt a strange and terrible calm, the same that precedes hurricanes. It was the confirmation of what her soul already knew, the verbalization of the truth she had tried to deny for so long. The air entered her lungs with difficulty, and she had to focus to keep the tremor in her hands from becoming visible. She raised her eyes and stared at him, perhaps for the first time in months, seeing not the man she loved, but the executioner of her hopes. He continued not looking at her, which made everything even crueler. It was a verdict pronounced by a judge who refused to face the defendant. Tears burned in her eyes, a salty flood wanting to burst the dams, but she held them back with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She breathed deeply once, twice, feeling the knot in her throat tighten. She said nothing. She just stood up, took her almost untouched plate, and carried it to the kitchen. The sound of running water in the sink was her only response. For Michael, that silence was the capitulation he expected. He felt relieved, free from the weight of a performance that had lasted too long. 2 days passed in a limbo of cold formalities. They crossed paths in the hallways like two strangers in a hotel. But something in Sophia's body was different. A persistent fatigue, a slight dizziness in the morning, and the most undeniable sign, the delay. She bought the pharmacy test on her way back from work, hiding the small box at the bottom of her bag as if it were an illegal artifact. At home, she locked herself in the bathroom and followed the instructions with trembling hands. The minutes of waiting were an eternity suspended in time, and then the 2 lines appeared, clear, unequivocal, cruel, positive, pregnant. Sophia sat on the toilet lid, the small plastic stick in her hand, and the world which had remained stable during the divorce request now spun uncontrollably. A dry laugh, without humor, escaped her lips. It was the final irony of fate. A life was beginning just as hers seemed to have ended. She didn't cry. The shock was so great it froze her tears. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw a woman she didn't recognize, a stranger with wide eyes of panic and, at the same time, silent fury. She waited for him to arrive. She needed to tell him, not out of a sense of duty to him, but out of a need to face that reality once and for all. When Michael entered the bedroom, tossing his briefcase onto the armchair, she was standing in the center of the room, like a statue awaiting the final blow. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. He looked at her with impatience. "I'm pregnant." The word hung in the air, vibrating. Michael froze. His face went through a succession of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and finally a cold anger that hardened his features. He took a step back, as if her body emanated a contagious danger. "No, it can't be," he hissed. "You must be mistaken." She just shook her head no, her eyes fixed on his, challenging him to deny reality. Contempt took over his face, a mask of repulsion that hurt her more than any shout. "Get rid of it," he ordered, his voice low and cutting. "I've already decided, Sophia. I'm not going to be stuck because of a mistake. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life tied to you because of that." It was in that instant, upon hearing the word mistake used to describe the life growing inside her, that the last spark of love Sophia felt for him extinguished, turned to ashes. The pain gave way to a glacial clarity. She looked at him, no longer as the abandoned wife, but as an adversary who had just discovered the enemy's weak point. And his weak point was fear, the dread of the obligation his father preached so much. A supernatural calm invaded her. She straightened her shoulders, and a serenity almost frightening took over her voice. "Okay, Michael," she replied, her tone level, almost indifferent. "Fine." Her reaction completely disarmed him. He expected pleas, tears, accusations. He expected a dramatic scene that would put him in the villain's role, but that would deep down reaffirm his power. Instead, he received a cold acceptance, an agreement that absolved him. A sigh of relief escaped his lips. He believed she had understood, that she would do what was sensible. What Michael, in his arrogance and relief, couldn't perceive was what was happening behind those suddenly calm eyes. He didn't see that her calm wasn't submission, but the silence of a revolution. In that exact moment, while he congratulated himself for having solved the problem, Sophia made the most important decision of her life. That child wouldn't be a mistake. It would be her salvation. And he, the man who discarded her, would never again have any power, any right, any part in the story that she and she alone would write from now on. The silent war had ended. The escape was about to begin. The next morning dawned grey and humid, a perfect mirror of Sophia's state of mind. However, beneath the fog of pain and uncertainty, a new determination, hard as diamond, had formed. She moved through the apartment with the precision of a strategist planning her retreat. To Michael, who watched her sidelong while drinking his coffee, she was just the image of defeat, quiet, pale, submissive. He saw her pick up her bag, put on a light coat, and walk toward the door. "I'm going to take care of that," she said, her voice neutral, without looking directly at him. A nod was his response, a gesture loaded with a relief that bordered on selfishness. He felt free, as if the weight of a decade of obligations was finally being lifted from his shoulders. He didn't accompany her to the door, didn't offer a glass of water, didn't ask if she needed anything. He just remained seated, his gaze already turned to the financial market news on his phone, the problem already relegated to a footnote in his story. He didn't see the look Sophia cast back before closing the door, a look that held no sadness, but a cold and definitive farewell. That apartment, which she had once tried to turn into a home, was now just the setting of a past she was determined to bury. Upon closing the door, the click of the lock sounded like the starting gun for her new life. She didn't go to the clinic. The lie was the first wall she built to protect herself. Instead, she walked to the corner, her heart pounding against her ribs, and hailed the first taxi that appeared. The city passed by the window like a blur of concrete and movement, a world indifferent to the drama unfolding inside that yellow car. She gave the driver Jessica's address, her childhood friend, the only person in the world she would trust with her secret. Jessica lived in a bohemian neighborhood on the other side of the city, a universe of low-rise buildings, tree-lined streets, and a community atmosphere that brutally contrasted with the aseptic coldness of the area where Sophia lived. Each mile traveled was a step away from the life that suffocated her. When the taxi stopped in front of the simple building with its colorful facade, Sophia felt the first truly pure breath of air in a long time. She paid the fare with the money she had withdrawn the night before, a small amount from her personal savings that now represented her independence fund. Jessica answered the door on the second ring, her curly hair tied in a messy bun, her face without makeup, and her eyes full of instant concern upon seeing her friend's state. Sophia didn't need to say much. Her paleness, the tremor on her lips, and the handbag she clutched were a manifesto. "I need a few days," was all she managed to say, her voice choked. "Don't tell anyone." Jessica, who had known Sophia since they were girls and could read her subtext like no one else, didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her friend's pain was an open book. She just pulled her into a tight hug, a hug that said, "You're safe here," and led her inside. Jessica's apartment was the opposite of Sophia's, small, a bit chaotic, full of stacked books, plants in every corner, and the comforting smell of sandalwood incense. It was a real home, a place where life pulsed imperfectly and genuinely. "Stay as long as you need," said Jessica, pointing to the guest room, a simple space with a single bed and a window overlooking an inner garden. "The house is yours." And for the first time in years, Sophia felt that maybe, just maybe, she could have a place in the world again. The first nights were a dive into the abyss. The silence of the small room was different from the silence of her old apartment. There, the silence wasn't of absence, but of introspection. Sophia lay in bed, her hand instinctively resting on her still flat belly, and let the avalanche of feelings hit her. The pain of betrayal, the humiliation of contempt, the paralyzing fear of the future. Everything came in waves, and she cried. She cried for hours, a silent, convulsive cry that washed away years of repressed tears. She cried for the love she had dedicated to a man who never deserved it, cried for the youth she felt she had wasted, cried for the innocence that had been stolen from her. But amid the weeping, something else began to emerge. Anger. A pure, crystalline anger that wasn't destructive but energizing. Anger at Michael, at his father, at her own passivity. And that anger began to dry her tears, to strengthen her spine. She spent nights awake, her hand on her belly, and whispered conversations with the tiny life she carried. "It's going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to the embryo. "I'll take care of you. We don't need him." With each repetition, the phrase gained more strength, transforming from a wish into a vow. While Sophia waged her internal battle in the refuge of Jessica's apartment, Michael lived in a world of relief and planning. He firmly believed that the problem had been surgically removed from his life. He felt light, as if he had gotten rid of a burden. He told his father about the divorce, omitting the pregnancy part, and received a nod of approval. "About time, son. Marriage has to be practical, not a dead weight." His father's words reinforced his conviction that he had done the right thing. He hired a lawyer and instructed him to be generous. He wanted a quick and uncomplicated divorce. In his mind, he was being a gentleman. He planned to leave Sophia a considerable amount, enough for her to rent a good apartment and start over. It was a way to buy his peace of mind, to silence any remnant of guilt that might dare to appear. He imagined the future, the freedom to come and go whenever he wanted, weekends with friends, maybe a new relationship, lighter, without the silent demands he always felt from Sophia. He didn't imagine, not even in his most distant dreams, the true nature of reality. He didn't know that while he calculated values and planned his freedom, Sophia was weaving their future, a future in which he was just a footnote, a memory to be overcome. He had no idea that she carried not only a new life, but the courage that he, with all his posture of a strong and decisive man, never had. The days in Jessica's apartment began to transform. Gradually, Sophia started leaving the room. She helped her friend cook, water the plants, organize the books. They were simple, mundane tasks, but they anchored her in the present, preventing her from drowning in the murky waters of the past. Jessica was the perfect antidote to the poison consuming her. With her practical way and acidic humor, she didn't allow Sophia to sink into self-pity. Okay, he was a monumental jerk. Fact. "Now, what are we going to do about it?" she asked one day, while chopping vegetables for dinner. The direct question, no beating around the bush, was like a shock of reality. Sophia realized she needed a plan. The first decision was to look for a job. She had a degree in interior design, a profession she had abandoned to dedicate herself to the marriage, at Michael's request. Now she dusted off her portfolio, updated her resume, and started sending emails. The second decision was about the child. She would schedule a prenatal appointment, take care of her health, do everything necessary to ensure her baby came into the world strong and healthy. And the third, and hardest, was about Michael. She wouldn't seek him out, wouldn't ask for child support, wouldn't inform him about the birth. He had made his choice by calling their child a mistake. Now she would make hers. The choice to be a single mother, independent, the sole and absolute guardian of that life. It was a scary decision, but also incredibly liberating. For the first time, Sophia felt the reins of her life were in her own hands. She was no longer Michael's wife, Mr. Thompson's daughter-in-law. She was just Sophia, and she was about to become a mother, and that, she decided, was more than enough. In the first days after Sophia's departure, Michael experienced a sensation he mistook for freedom. The apartment, once a stage for awkward silences, was now his exclusive kingdom. He could leave his shoes in the middle of the living room, eat cold pizza straight from the box in front of the TV, and play loud music late into the night. There were no more expectant eyes from Sophia, no silent pressure from her attempts at connection. He felt light, unencumbered, the captain of his own ship. He went out with friends, frequented trendy bars, accepted invitations to parties he would have refused before. He flirted with other women, drawn to the novelty, the absence of history and expectations. For a brief period, he believed he had made the best decision of his life. He was finally living by his own rules, free from the obligation his father had mentioned so often. But freedom, he soon discovered, has a strange echo when it resounds in emptiness. Gradually, the initial euphoria began to dissipate, giving way to a subtle discomfort, a dissonance he couldn't name. The apartment, once his kingdom, started to seem too big, too cold. The silence he had so desired ceased to be peaceful and became accusatory. Every room held Sophia's ghost. The kitchen, impeccably clean, reminded him of the dinners she prepared. The bedroom, with the bed always unmade now, seemed to cry out for the order and the scent of fabric softener she left on the sheets. He tried to fill the void with noise, the TV always on, constant music, phone calls to friends, but nothing helped. The parties became monotonous, the conversations superficial, and the flirts, once exciting, now seemed a useless effort to feel something that simply wasn't there. Everything had lost its color, like an old photograph fading under the sun. The turning point came on a sleepless night, when the house's silence was so deep he could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Restless, he got up and started walking through the apartment, a prisoner in his own fortress of solitude. That's when he decided to do something he'd been putting off: pack Sophia's things. He opened her side of the closet, and the soft scent of the perfume she used hit him like a punch in the stomach. He began taking out the clothes, shoes, books, stacking everything in boxes with mechanical efficiency, trying not to think, not to feel. As he emptied the nightstand drawer, his fingers found a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside, carefully stored, were all the notes she had written to him over the years. He took them, feeling the texture of the colored paper, her rounded handwriting. He started reading, one by one. "Made your favorite cake. Don't be late for dinner. Good luck on that big meeting today. I'm rooting for you." They were fragments of a love he had treated with indifference, witnesses to a dedication he never knew how to value. Then at the bottom of the box he found one, written on light blue paper that he didn't remember seeing. The date was from a few months before the separation. The handwriting seemed a bit shaky. "You smiled in your sleep today. A real smile that reached your eyes. I think you finally dreamed of me." That simple phrase, loaded with such pure and fragile hope, was the dam that broke. The armor Michael had built around his heart, forged with his father's cynicism and the fear of feeling, simply disintegrated. A dry, painful sob tore from his throat, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. He fell to his knees on the bedroom floor, the boxes and clothes scattered around him, and cried. It wasn't a contained masculine cry. It was a total collapse, a desperate wail from someone who had just awakened to the dimension of their own ruin. The man who prided himself on feeling nothing now felt everything at once. The loss, the guilt, the longing, and a regret so vast and deep it threatened to drown him. He cried for the woman he loved without knowing, for the child he rejected without thinking, for the happiness he had in his hands and let slip through his fingers. From that night on, regret became his constant companion, a daily punishment he imposed on himself. He stopped going out, drinking, seeking distractions. The solitude, once a discomfort, now was a penance he accepted. He spent hours in the silent apartment, haunted by memories and what-ifs. What if he had valued the coffee with cinnamon? What if he had responded to the notes? What if he had embraced the pregnancy news instead of rejecting it? The questions tortured him day and night. He lost weight, and deep dark circles settled under his eyes, visible marks of the war he waged inside. His friends didn't understand. His father called him weak, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, Michael was being honest with himself, and the truth was devastating. The months dragged on, each day a grey copy of the previous one. Until, on a spring afternoon, he decided to go for a walk, needing air, space. He wandered aimlessly through downtown Seattle, observing people with melancholic distance. That's when, stopping at a traffic light, he saw her across the street. Time stopped. The noise of cars, people's voices, everything disappeared. It was Sophia, but not the Sophia he remembered. This woman seemed stronger, more whole. There was a serenity on her face, a firm posture he had never seen before. She wore a simple dress that didn't try to hide, but celebrated the prominent belly of an advanced pregnancy. She walked slowly, with one hand on her back and a discreet smile on her lips as she looked at the window of a baby store. The truth hit him with the force of a runaway train. Every piece of the puzzle fit in an instant of brutal clarity. Her calm in accepting the end, her silent departure, the disappearance. Everything made sense. A clear and overwhelming thought echoed in his mind. She didn't do it. She lied to me. She protected me from the guilt. The ground seemed to disappear under his feet. He leaned on the traffic light pole, air missing from his lungs. She hadn't just saved their child's life, but also saved him from becoming a complete monster in his own eyes. She had spared him the heaviest guilt, allowing him to live in ignorance of his cowardice, and in doing so, she had excluded him forever. He watched her cross the street and disappear into the crowd, a serene goddess carrying a future of which he would never be part. There, standing on the corner of some street, surrounded by strangers, Michael understood for the first time, and in the most painful way possible, the true and irrevocable meaning of the word loss. It wasn't about losing a wife or a home. It was about losing himself, about losing the only chance he had to be a better man, and that loss, he knew, would haunt him forever. The image of Sophia, pregnant and serene, etched itself into Michael's mind like a photograph in flames. The revelation of her lie didn't bring anger, but an overwhelming wave of admiration and even deeper guilt. He spent days in a state of torpor, the scene replaying in his head. Her strength, the dignity with which she carried the life he had rejected, all of it exposed the smallness of his own actions. The apathy consuming him gave way to a new and desperate urgency. He couldn't change the past, couldn't erase the cruel words he said, but maybe, just maybe, he could do something in the present. Not to win her back because he felt he had lost that right forever, but to somehow repair the damage, to show that the man who saw her on the street was no longer the same one who sent her away. His first action was that of an amateur detective driven by desperation. He knew Sophia wouldn't go back to her parents' house, as their relationship was as formal and distant as his with his own. The only clue he had was Jessica. He vaguely remembered Sophia mentioning her friend, the confidant of a lifetime. With a mix of shame and determination, he searched for Jessica's name on social media, scouring lists of mutual friends until he found her profile. There wasn't much public information, but a photo tagged by someone else revealed the name of the coffee shop where she apparently worked. It was a thread of hope he clung to with all his strength. The next day he went to the coffee shop, his heart beating out of rhythm. He sat at a corner table ordering a coffee he barely touched, and waited. Hours later, he saw her. Jessica, with her unmistakable hair, waiting tables with energetic efficiency. He didn't approach her there. He waited until the end of her shift, following her at a respectful distance, feeling like a coward, a stalker, but driven by a need that outweighed the shame. He followed her to a simple building, in a neighborhood he barely knew, and knew with visceral certainty that he had found the place. The next day he returned. He stopped in front of the building's iron gate, his hand trembling as he reached for the buzzer. What would he say? What words could even begin to express the abyss of his regret? He pressed the button for the apartment listed as Jessica's and waited, the sound of his own heart echoing in his ears. The building door opened, and Jessica appeared, not at the apartment door but at the main entrance, like a sentinel guarding her territory. Her eyes shot him with cold, cutting hostility. She recognized him immediately, and her face closed into a mask of contempt. "What do you want here, Michael?" she asked, her voice low but loaded with contained fury. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The rehearsed apologies, the explanations, everything fell apart before that accusatory gaze. I needed," he stammered. Jessica crossed her arms, blocking the passage. "She doesn't want to see you," she said, each word a stone. "She's rebuilding the life you tried to destroy. So, if you came here to ask for forgiveness and ease your conscience, you can turn around and disappear." Michael felt the impact of the words like a physical blow. He deserved that, and much more. But he didn't leave. He looked at Jessica, and for the first time his eyes held no arrogance or indifference, but raw vulnerability, genuine desperation. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," he said, his voice finally finding a thread of firmness. "I know I don't deserve it. I want to help, in any way I can, without asking for anything in return." Jessica studied him for a long moment, her eyes scrutinizing his, searching for any sign of falsehood. She saw the pain, the exhaustion, the sincerity of a broken man. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, and perhaps a drop of compassion. "If you came to fix things," she said, her voice still hard but with a new edge, "stay silent and prove it. Not with words, with actions." And the first time you make her suffer, I swear I'll end you." And with that warning, she turned and went inside, leaving the door ajar. It was a precarious invitation, a minimal chance, and Michael seized it like a shipwrecked man clings to a piece of wood. And he stayed. His redemption began not with grand gestures, but with the humility of small things. He didn't try to talk to Sophia, who took refuge in her room whenever he appeared. He just made himself available to Jessica. "Need anything from the store?" he asked. And he went, bringing back the heavy bags, leaving them in the kitchen and departing without expecting thanks. One day, the shower in the small bathroom broke. He heard Jessica complaining on the phone about the cost of a plumber. The next day, he showed up with a toolbox and spent the whole afternoon fixing the issue, finishing the job dirty with grease and in silence. He learned to make coffee the way Jessica liked it, strong and black, and left it ready in the thermos before she woke up for work. He didn't ask for forgiveness with words. He asked for forgiveness with presence, with service, with a silent dedication that spoke louder than any speech. Sophia at first watched him from afar, through the crack in the bedroom door, her heart divided between distrust and hesitant curiosity. Seeing him there, the man who had discarded her, now assembling the crib he himself had bought and left at the door, was a surreal image. He didn't ask to come in, didn't force a conversation. He just did. He assembled the crib, cleaned up the mess, and left. Gradually, the ice wall around Sophia's heart began to show small cracks. She started leaving the room while he was there, moving through the house with studied caution. They didn't talk about the past. The conversations, when they happened, were about banal things: the weather, a news item on TV, the need to buy more diapers. But in each of his gestures, she saw a change. He was no longer the arrogant and distant man. He was someone who looked at her with a respect and reverence she had never seen before. He looked at her belly not with contempt, but with a wondrous and painful awe. One day she was in the kitchen, trying to reach a package of rice on the highest shelf, and the effort left her breathless. Michael, who was fixing a stuck drawer, stood up immediately. "Let me get that," he said, his voice soft. He approached, and for the first time in months they were close to each other. She could feel the warmth of his body, the smell of his soap. He grabbed the package, and as he handed it to her, their fingers brushed. It was a brief, accidental touch, but it sent an electric current through both. Their gazes met for a second, and in that second, a universe of unspoken things was communicated. His regret, her pain, the fragile possibility of something new. She looked away first, her heart racing. "Thanks," she whispered. It was the first word of gratitude she directed at him. For Michael, that thanks sounded like the most beautiful symphony. He knew the path would be long and uncertain. He knew that trust, once broken, is like a crystal vase that even glued back always shows its scars. But for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just fixing a shower or a drawer. He was, piece by piece, in silence and with patience, trying to rebuild the bridge he himself had blown up. Life has a peculiar way of announcing its greatest transformations in the silence of the night. Sophia's labor began like that, not with a scream, but with a sharp and deep pang that pulled her from sleep, a contraction that was both pain and promise. It was 3 a.m, and the city slept, oblivious to the miracle and panic settling in the small apartment. The low sound of her moan was enough. Michael, who now slept on an improvised mattress in the living room, a silent guardian in self-imposed vigil, jumped up, sleep evaporating instantly. He found her at the bedroom door, her face pale and bathed in sweat, her hands clutching her belly as if trying to contain the force of nature claiming her. There was no time for words. Their gazes met, and in a fraction of a second, the fear, the urgency, and a strange complicity united them. He supported her with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency of his movements, while Jessica, already on her feet, grabbed the maternity bag that had been ready for weeks. The descent down the stairs, the run to the car, everything happened in a blur of adrenaline and panting breaths. On the way to the hospital, under the ghostly light of street lamps, Michael drove with fierce concentration, one hand on the wheel, the other holding Sophia's. She squeezed his fingers with each contraction, a lancinating pain he felt as if it were his. and he didn't let go. He held her hand with the terrified fear of someone who knows he can't falter, with the devotion of a penitent before his last chance at redemption. In the sterile and lit environment of the hospital, time distorted. The hours dragged, each one a test of endurance for Sophia and a purgatory of anxiety for Michael. He remained by her side, a constant and silent presence. He didn't offer empty words of encouragement because he knew he didn't have that right. Instead, he offered his hand for her to crush, a damp towel for her forehead, a glass of water for her dry lips. He was her anchor, her servant, her mute spectator, and Sophia, amid the fog of pain, allowed it. She leaned on his presence, not as a wife, but as a warrior accepting help from an unexpected ally on the battlefield. And then, as the morning sun began to paint the sky with shades of pink and orange, the sound that would change their universe forever erupted in the delivery room. A cry. Not a cry of pain, but a cry of life, sharp, strong, triumphant. The sound of a new beginning. In that instant, the fortress Michael had rebuilt around himself came down. He collapsed into a chair in the corner of the room, his face in his hands, and the sobs he had held for months came in an uncontrollable torrent. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love so overwhelming it physically hurt. "It's a girl," said the nurse, her voice soft and smiling, as she wrapped the small body in a blanket. She approached Michael and, with a gentle gesture, placed the baby in his arms. He held her, trembling, his heart seeming too big for his chest. She was tiny, perfect, with tufts of dark hair and eyes still closed to the world. He looked at that small miracle and saw forgiveness in a form he never imagined. Then he raised his gaze to Sophia. She was exhausted, pale, but her eyes shone with a new and powerful light. She watched him hold their daughter, and for the first time since he left, she didn't see the cold man of the past, the ghost of a failed marriage. She saw a transformed man, a man broken and remade by the force of regret, a father in awe of his daughter, and in her gaze, Michael found no accusation, but a glimpse of acceptance, a silent invitation to share that sacred moment. The months that followed were a symphony of new sounds and smells. The small apartment, once a silent refuge, now pulsed with life. The midnight hunger cries, the gummy laughs of their daughter, whom they named Olivia, the smell of warm milk and baby powder. The house that had once been cold and empty for Michael, and later a sanctuary of restart for Sophia, became a home for the three of them. Michael dove into fatherhood with the devotion of someone paying a sacred debt. He became the master of late nights, changing diapers with surprising skill, preparing bottles at the exact temperature, learning to soothe colic cries with a gentle sway and whispered lullabies. He didn't do it as someone helping, but as someone fulfilling his most essential role. He wanted Sophia to rest, to recover, to know she was no longer alone, and she, observing him, felt the last walls of her heart give way. She saw his love not in words, but in every gesture of care, in every sleepless night, in every adoring look he cast at their daughter. One late afternoon, when the setting sun poured golden light through the living room window, little Olivia slept peacefully in the crib. Sophia was sitting on the sofa, tired but happy, watching the dust dance in the beams of light. Michael approached, and without a word, knelt before her. It wasn't a theatrical gesture, but an act of humility, simple and profound. From his pocket he took a small box, and from inside it, a discreet ring, a thin and smooth band, without stones or ostentation, but shining with the promise of honest love. His eyes met hers, and his voice, though choked, was firm. "Sophia, I spent half my life believing that love was a weakness, and that a real man stays out of duty. I was wrong. A man's greatest duty is to be worthy of the love he receives. And the greatest strength is the courage to love back." He paused, breathing deeply. "I don't want to be the man who stays out of obligation anymore. I want to be the man who chooses to stay, every day, out of love. Will you marry me again? This time, just for love?" The tears Sophia had held for so long finally rolled down her face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were of healing, of a cycle closing, of a happiness she thought she would never feel again. She looked at the man kneeling at her feet, at their daughter sleeping in the crib, at the life they were building on the ruins of the past. And she smiled, a smile that lit up her whole face, that reached her eyes and made them shine. "Yes, Michael," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Now, yes." He placed the ring on her finger, and the touch of their hands was a vow. And there, in the quiet of that room, between their daughter's soft breathing and the breeze bringing the scent of the night, they restarted. Not like before, not erasing the scars, but accepting them as part of the map that had brought them there. They were proof that true love isn't what is born perfect in a field of flowers, but what stubbornly reborns after the longest and most painful of storms, stronger, wiser, and infinitely more precious. If you made it this far, it's because your soul connected to this story. Write "I liked it" if you believe in the power of second chances.